Mr. President, I'm honored to follow my distinguished colleague from Maryland into this discussion about our priorities as we address the debt limit that we're approaching. I think that the Leader Reid was wise to choose to cancel the scheduled 4th of July recess so that we can continue to work toward an agreement to prevent defaulting by the United States on our government debt and the financial consequences that will ensue here in America and around the world. As we negotiate an end to this debt limit standoff, we also obviously have to address our looming budget deficits and our looming debt, which threaten to cripple our potential for economic growth in years to come. Where we are on this, of course, is that President Clinton put our budget on course to permanent surpluses. We would be a debt-free nation right now if the predictions that the Nonpartisan Budget Office had put in place when President Clinton left office had been kept. But in fact, there were changes. President Bush and a Republican Congress squandered away those surpluses with unnecessary tax cuts and unwise spending increases, and our multi-trillion-dollar deficits have resulted. We must now fix the budget and bring it back into balance. So where are we in this standoff? Well, we need to cut spending. Democrats and Republicans agree on that. We need to protect ordinary families who enjoy ordinary levels of income from tax increases. Democrats and Republicans agree on that. The disagreement is whether we also need to raise some revenues in other areas to help balance the budget. Areas like oil and gas and ethanol subsidies, closing corporate tax loopholes, and putting an end to high-income tax dodge schemes. On that front, I rise in support of Leader Reid's resolution, calling for a deficit reduction package that includes a more meaningful contribution from millionaires and billionaires. The Republicans are threatening that they'd rather let this government default on its obligations than to what they call raise revenues by requiring the wealthy to pay their fair share. Just last week, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell called on President Obama to take any raised revenues off the table and to balance the budget solely on spending cuts that affect the middle class and lower-income families. In an opinion piece on CNN.com, Senator McConnell proclaimed tax hikes can't pass the Congress. Well, let's pull the curtain back and take a little glimpse behind the curtain at who the Republicans are fighting so hard to protect. Here's a building in New York City on Park Avenue, the Helmsley building. Because this building is large enough to have its very own zip code, we know from actual IRS information, not projections, not guesses, not conclusions drawn from rates, from actual paid-in IRS information, that the wealthy and successful individuals and corporations that call this building home paid a 14.7% total federal tax rate in the last year that they've done the calculation, 2007. That is lower than the actual tax rate on average of the New York City janitor or doorman or security guard who would work in this building. It is upside down. The people who serve the occupants of this building pay a higher tax rate than the occupants of this majestic building. The tax gimmicks that let those occupants pay a lower rate than the people who take care of the door and the cleaning and the security for them, that is what the Republicans are fighting to protect. And this problem isn't just a fluke in the Helmsley building. Each year, the Internal Revenue Service publishes a report that adds up all the taxes paid by the 400 highest income earning Americans. I spoke earlier this year, several times actually, on last year's report, which included data from 2007, like the same year as the Helmsley building. In that year, these super high income earners, making on average $1/3 billion approximately, a billion with a B, they paid a lower tax rate in 2007, the 400 of them did on average, than an average hospital orderly who's a single payer pushing a cart down the halls of Rhode Island Hospital at night. In May, the IRS published updated data on the top 400 income earners for 2008. Let's take a look at the status of the top 400 earners in that more recent year. Well, they're down from $1/3 billion on average to over $250 million each. And certainly we can applaud that kind of success in America. That's definitely the American dream come true. But on average, they paid an average tax rate of 18.2%. That's what they actually paid. That's what they put into the IRS. Once you get through all the tax dodges, all the different schemes, all the different deductions, all the different rates, when you actually put the pen to the paper at the bottom line, it's 18.2%. We spent a lot of time around here debating whether the top income tax rate should be 35% or 39.6%. Folks, that is not what they are paying. The tax code is so filled with special provisions that tend to exclusively or disproportionately benefit the wealthy that the highest 400 income earners earning more than $250 million in 1 year paid an average tax rate of 18.2%. This means that the 400 highest earning individuals in the nation in 2008 paid the same effective tax rate as a truck driver in Rhode Island. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, on average, an ordinary truck driver earns $40,200, which is about the place in the tax code on the way up where you first hit paying 18.2% of your income in taxes. So what the Republicans are asking as part of the debt limit compromise is that we cut employment and job training support now at a time of record joblessness, while they continue to fight to make sure that people making $250 million a year pay lower federal tax rates than average middle-class families. Here's another building that has a little story to tell. This is a building called Ugland House. It's over in the Cayman Islands. This building doesn't look like much. It's pretty nondescript. But over 18,000 corporations claim to be doing business out of this building. 18,000 out of that little building. Clearly, what is going on is that those corporations are hiding through shell companies, phony corporate identities that they and wealthy taxpayers use to hide assets and play tax games with the IRS. This kind of mischief down in the Cayman Islands and elsewhere through these tax dodges is estimated to cost us as much as $100 billion every year. As part of a debt limit compromise, the Republicans are asking us to cut America's investments in science, cut America's investments in technology, and at the same time, they're fighting to protect corporations that hide in offshore tax havens so that the honest American taxpayer has to pick up the burden for them. That's what they're fighting for when you pull back the curtain on this. When all is said and done, everyone, Democrat and Republican, agree that there need to be cuts. And everyone, Republican and Democrat, agrees that there should be no tax increases on ordinary middle-class families. Those concerns are not at issue. Where is the dispute? What is the blockade? Again, pull back the curtain, and you'll see that the Republicans are willing to let us, as a nation, default for the first time in our history on our debts, which would devastate our economy. All to defend tax rates for millionaires and billionaires that are lower than those paid by regular hardworking Americans. All to defend offshore tax havens that are used to evade taxes while ordinary families are expected to pay their taxes. All to defend corporate and special interest tax loopholes, earmarks for the wealthy and well-connected. That's where they've chosen to stand their ground. That's where they've chosen to pick a fight. As our nation rushes towards the August 2nd deadline and the agreement deadline before August 2nd, when we have to have something in place in order to get the president's signature on a bill by August 2nd, as we rush towards that, as the world's economy and America's economy are imperiled by the threat of our debt limit not being lifted, What are they fighting for? That's what they're fighting for. For the super rich, for the super well-connected, for the tax dodgers that they take advantage of, and for the lower rates that the super rich pay compared to the rest of all of us. Those are the interests that Republicans are protecting when they reject any revenue increases to bring down our unsustainable deficits. They say it's tax increases that they're against. Well, the answer to that should be Americans asking a question back. Tax increases for whom? Because if it's tax increase for the guy who's making $250 million and is paying a lower tax rate than a truck driver, that's okay with me. That's a tax dodge we can get rid of. It's a tax increase for a company that's going to hide in this building in the Cayman Islands to shelter its income so that Rhode Island corporations and Oregon corporations, American corporations, have to make up the difference. American taxpayers have to make up the difference, and they can't hide their income down there any longer. That's a tax increase I can live with. I don't think that's what the ordinary American has in mind when they say we don't want tax increases. They mean we don't want our rates to go up. But ordinary Americans know that our tax code is filled, riddled with gimmicks and tricks and loopholes and deductions that have been put in it over the years by lobbyists. They are earmarks. They just happen to be earmarks in the tax code. And they spend America's money through the tax code just as much as if it was an appropriation. But what's the big difference? The big difference is it takes being a very wealthy individual or a very big corporation to be able to take advantage of those tricks, to be able to hire a lobbyist who can build that trick into the tax code, and to have the revenues and the resources to be able to maneuver through the tax code that way. Ordinary Americans don't do that. You can ask pretty much anybody in Rhode Island, show them the thousands of pages of the Internal Revenue Code, and ask them, who's got a special provision in it for you? Nobody does. They're regular Americans, they pay regular taxes, they do things the way they're supposed to be done. The gimmicks and the tricks are all at the upper end, and it's time to clean house, particularly now when we so badly need the revenues to balance our budget. Mr. President, it is simply inexcusable that our tax system permits billionaires to pay lower tax rates than truck drivers, that it allows the wealthy to avoid taxes by hiding assets in phony offshore corporations. Even if we had no budget deficits, just being fair, just honoring the principle of equality would demand that we address these inexcusable discrepancies that favor the wealthy and the well-connected. Our budget crisis, however, brings real urgency to the problem. So as we continue to work to avoid a debt default by the United States of America, and to bring down our budget deficits and to reduce our crippling national debt, I hope that Senator McConnell and the Republican conference will revisit the potential to significantly cut the deficit by addressing the tax loopholes, tax gimmicks, and frankly, outright injustice to the ordinary American taxpayer that they are now defending here in the Senate. I thank the chair. I see the distinguished senator from Alabama arriving, and I will yield the floor.